Blimey. This is one out of a jam jar you got here.
Warning. The House of Mystery contains demons, angels, elementals, magicians, wizards, apparitions, adult language, and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not enter the House of Mystery.
All right, then. On with the show.
All right, hello, welcome everyone to the House of Mystery, the John Constantine and Friends podcast. I am Michael, your host and curator. I will give you a tour if you wish. And the demon bisexual butler will take care of your every needs. Every need or every needs? Every needs.
Needs. Remember, you got to be...
All needs.
All needs.
He will take care of all your needs, whether they be on the up and up or more hedonistic, if you're into those types of pleasures. Isn't that right?
Yes, because, you know, we have to make everyone welcomed in the House of Mystery.
Okay, what are you, the hobbits that posted that meme today? I just dated our show.
And that is A-okay.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. We are going to be continuing our discussion on Netflix's Sandman series. During our previous discussion, we went into detail on a few aspects of episodes 1 through 5 that we felt were worthy of discussion, that were suitable for discussion, or appropriate, there we go, for discussion when it comes to this show, because this show, of course, is a Constantine-centric show. But we're going to continue that discussion today. There are certain things that we didn't get into. I wanted to talk about some of the DC-eccentric aspects that were removed, so we're going to talk about that. We're also going to go over our favorite episode out of episodes 1 through 5. And then we'll talk about some developmental things, because there are some silly rumors that have been confirmed by Neil Gaiman that's been circulating for years pertaining to original adaptations that ended up getting scrapped. And when you find out that these rumors were actually true, thank God they actually trashed these films and they never saw the light of day, because some of these ideas are so bad that I can't imagine that this property would have been able to recover.
I think so too, but you know what? That's the genius of Gaiman, though, because he is very imaginative. So I'm willing to say, hey, at least he knew what not to use.
Well, exactly. That gives me so much more hope when it comes to future adaptations of his work that he's involved in, because he isn't just a good writer. He obviously understands what will work in live action form as well. And we've seen that. I mean, we are hardcore Sandman fans. We are hard John Constantine, hardcore, and sometimes hard John Constantine fans. Sometimes we are erect during this show, so I don't think I misspoke, right, David?
Yes.
We are hardcore fans of these things, and we are not upset about this Sandman adaptation. I know there are some that have been a little miffed with certain things. There have been some complaints about the alleged woke casting choices, which I think is rather silly. I'm not going to deny that there isn't a bit of wokeness going around when it comes to certain other franchises, and I'm only using that word because it gets the point across. I actually hate that word, and I try not to use it because I think it's now considered a catch-all. Anytime you don't like something, it's just, oh, that's woke. There's no reason to actually form any type of critical thought or analysis. If you don't like something and you want to malign it quickly, you just call it woke.
Yes.
That's it. So that being said, David, we must let potential new listeners know where to find us. You can find our show on iTunes and or Spotify. Those are our two preferred places. But honestly, you can get our show pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts. You just have to search House of Mystery. Now, if you did not listen to the first show, all you have to do is scroll back one show on our feed, and it should pop right up. You probably want to listen to that discussion first because it will give you better context for this discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, so David, The last thing that I had touched on before we closed out our last show was the DC eccentric aspects that were removed. Now, we already went into the reasons why Neil Gaiman did some of those things. It just made sense when you compare the comic book to the live action medium, and then, of course, all the different iterations of superheroes out there and the potential distractions by putting all these DC elements in there, such as the Justice League, Arkham Asylum, Dr. Destiny. You start throwing all these big DC names around, and rather than actually help the story, it would actually distract.
Easily. Yeah, and that was the problem with, I understand that people would rather have them stay true to the characters, say, like, of John, and just refer to him as, Dr. Destiny. But that would take away from the story, because the story's not about him. It's about Morpheus. Just like what I said in the past episode, you cannot forget that basically this series is called The Sandman.
Yeah.
It's not called the DC Universe.
Right.
It's called The Sandman.
Yes. And even though they removed something like the alias of John D, and they refused to acknowledge Dr. Destiny, it didn't change the character in any way. The essence of Dr. Destiny, a.k.a. John D, was identical.
Yes.
There was nothing different. They didn't decide to go a different direction. They just simply didn't assign him his supervillain alias because it would have distracted and created more questions that this series just can't go into with a 10, 11 episode order. They had to focus on the immediate and what's important. And the story itself is about Sandman, as you said.
Yeah.
So I understand, or we understand, why they had to remove some of these DC-eccentric aspects. And, of course, if you listen to Neil Gaiman, he also mentioned there were some licensing issues, which, in my opinion, it doesn't really add up. I feel like that might have been a bit of an excuse just to easily just put people, pacify some of the detractors, because we're dealing with a Warner Brothers product that was licensed out to Netflix. Now that could be the issue there. Maybe they didn't want to license out all the other potential IPs, even in just name, to Netflix when they were just simply using Sandman. So that could be the case. However, I could see numerous ways that they have worked around that in the past. So,
well, one clear example that I remember you actually brought it up after we were done with the show is, in particular, the removal of a key character when Dream goes to hell.
Yeah, well,
and
yep.
I don't know if you want to jump into that now, but that is a clear example.
You're stealing my thunder, David. You're ruining.
You're ruining
the show, David. That's so stupid. No, go ahead.
But it is the fact that basically Dream or Morpheus goes to hell, and his companion in the story is a major character in DC Universe, and that's Etrigan.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest,
I wouldn't say his companion.
He was his companion, dude. I mean, Etrigan took
he was
Morpheus down to hell to go meet Lucifer, and he was the guide.
Yeah, but he wasn't a companion of Sandman. That's like saying so you're the demon bisexual butler. Now, are you the companion of all of our listeners because you're guiding them? Okay. No, you're just the demon bisexual butler. You're here. You're basically the Etrigan of our show.
I kind of feel
that's what. Yeah, you're the Etrigan of our show.
The Etrigan of the show. But like, I remembered I was. I know you mentioned that you were disappointed in that. I was too, but at the end of the day, I basically felt it's not about Etrigan; it's about Dream's journey.
Right, and that's why I wasn't mad about it, because
I did like the rhyming. They still kept the rhyming,
yes,
which was hilarious.
Yeah, so you took us there, so let's just jump into it, and I will just share my only. This is where the fan baby gets the best of me. Now, it doesn't ruin anything for me. It doesn't ruin the show, but it did get under my skin just for a half a second, because I was like, why? Why not just use Etrigan? imagine if we finally saw Etrigan in live action form for the first time. It would have been fucking glorious. It would have been great. And when Morpheus first started to approach the gates and you hear that deep voice and he was rhyming,
Yes.
I got out of my seat and got really close to the TV because I was ready to celebrate.
You were ready to hug the TV and
Yes. Unfortunately, it was not Etrigan. It was another demon that did have purpose, or I should say not a story arc, but he was included in Sandman, in the Sandman series as well, and that is the demon Squatterbloat.
Squatterbloat. Yes.
So it's not like they just pulled some random demon out of their ass. This demon was also in the Sandman series.
It's a very similar. It's almost, when I think about it, it's the same methodology he decided to do with Constantine.
Yeah.
If you think about it, because he just took two characters that are in the same story and combined them. Same thing with Etrigan and Squatterbloat. Essentially, he just basically said, okay, he's on the... I kind of visualize that, yes, he was going into the series, he wanted to separate the DC universe as much as possible from the Sandman universe.
Yeah. Hey, fix your mic just a bit, David. It's going a little too far to your left.
How's that?
There you go.
But, like, when he combined the two characters, it was okay because Squatterbloat was in the book. So if you were going to remove a demon and just combine the role of what Etrigan did in the book and what Squatterbloat did, I kind of see the same methodology he used with Joanna Constantine.
Yeah, and also if you can consolidate, and let's say there's another episode down the road, or even in season 2 that you want to preface, or I should say highlight, that's probably a better way of saying, if you want to highlight or focus on Squatterbloat, let's say he has some relevance down the road, then perhaps he made a decision there that said, hey, you know what, let me consolidate. Why messy this show up with a bunch of random characters that we may or may not ever see again?
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that completely. Now, David, so Etrigan is mine. I hear something. Is your on the headphones?
No, I'm fine.
You don't hear that?
No. But hear what?
Phantom in disguise.
What?
There you
The
go.
actual Hercules is usually
That's what it is. Stupid ads. Sorry. I was about to accuse you, David.
Yeah, I was like,
are you watching sports over there? Okay, so we shared my only gripe, and I'm only using that to have some fun. It wasn't really a gripe.
Yeah.
Etrigan was my issue when it comes to all of the DC-eccentric things that Neil Gaiman had taken out of the television adaptation. What is yours? Is there something specific that you're like, you really wish you would have seen it?
I actually wish there's a sequence in the book where, in the very beginning, when Gaiman goes on to explain the importance of dreams first in the universe, and you see, like people dreaming, and there's this shot of Superman because someone's dreaming that they're Superman.
Okay.
And I was like going, I wish we could have seen that, because then it's a tie to the DC universe and showing that people know about Superman and the Justice League and stuff like that.
That would have been some powerful imagery too.
Exactly. And it's a
Yeah.
very powerful image because it sets the tone of what later on in episode 5, what Dream goes on to explain to John, why is it important that people dream?
Yeah, David, that's a good point, David, because that's probably one of my only issues with the first 6 or 5 episodes, is that there isn't enough emphasis on the importance of dreams. Because the opening comics, they spent actually quite a bit of time on several characters who were stuck in dreams, that were stuck in nightmares.
Insomnia.
The idea that dreams lent itself to a bit of optimism for humanity, that there was a reason why we needed to dream, and something like that Superman scene would have actually really built that idea up quite a bit. The importance of dreaming.
The importance of dreams, because like also part of that dreaming sequence in the very beginning it went on to explain the origins of the original, or quote unquote the original Sandman. You know, like
Yeah, which he wasn't even in this.
he wasn't even in this.
Yeah,
and
the actual superhero Sandman.
the superhero Sandman.
Yeah.
And like I remember in the comics that got played up because it was the inspiration of Morpheus and the dreams and stuff that made the original Sandman become the hero of the DC comic world. And that was, if there was a gripe that I had, that was probably it. It was like, would I have loved to seen the moments of great imagery of like how people, the importance of dreams set in the beginning? Yes.
Do you think it was an executive decision to remove a lot of those elements?
I think so.
Because, well, hold on, because when you look at what they did with this series here, and yes, there was definitely these moments in the comic books, but it felt more streamlined in the series, and it had to do with Morpheus's disconnection or his disconnect from humanity.
Yes.
And that's the purpose of episode 6. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but that's why episode 6 is so fucking powerful. That's the no. What's the one about the guy that never dies?
Oh, that's
episode 6, right?
No, that's 7.
7,
because
okay.
6 is the one where he's with Death. With
Okay,
his sister.
see, so those two episodes together, you put those two episodes together, and both of them are actually, for the most part, about Morpheus's disconnect from humanity.
people. Exactly.
Yeah, so maybe that's the reason why. Maybe if they had brought in those dream aspects, it wouldn't have created that distinct disconnect from Morpheus and humanity.
Yeah.
So again, you got to give take. That's why it's so hard to adapt comic books and books because to live action screen, because you don't know sometimes what's going to work, and what worked in your book or what worked in your comic book may not work in live action, and you got to have an eye for that.
Yeah.
It is not an easy task.
It's not an easy task. And it's one of those things that basically, remember when we first were discussing about this series, we were wondering how the hell is gaming going to be able to pull off a lot of the literary
You're right,
imagery
Yeah.
that he pulls off in any of his stories, even outside of Sandman. I mean, you look at some of his works like American Gods, and the imagery he just bathes his audience in, and you like go, how is he going to pull this off?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that basically like focusing on the crux of the story or the main bones of the story that he was trying to do help that transition.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be careful when adapting to live action, because also when you're looking at comic books, just by the nature of comic books, many times each issue is governed under a very different theme that would be governing the story for the second issue, third issue, fourth issue, fifth issue. And if you do that with a TV show, having all these different wide variety of themes embedded for one all the way across your narrative for your series that governs your myth arc, but then you have one per episode or two or three per episode, suddenly what's going to happen? You're going to have all types of contradictions in the ways of subconscious. You're going to feel it subconsciously, the viewer, that something doesn't quite work. Something's not clicking. And that's why when you go back and look at some of the things that Gaiman did, it does make sense. Specifically, the dreaming aspect. Yes, that was a moment that I was disappointed that we didn't get to see. But in retrospect, when you look back and analyze the potential reason as to why it was removed, it does start to make more sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, David, there are several other instances, big ones, where Gaiman and the showrunner just ripped it out of the original comic book. So here is an article that did all the legwork for me from comicbook.com.
Mm-hmm.
And it's titled "The Sandman. These DC characters were cut from the Netflix show." So, of course, we know of John Constantine, that was essentially merged with Joanna. We just talked about Etrigan was replaced by Squatterbloat. We also have discussed Dr. Destiny. And with Dr. Destiny comes the Arkham Asylum, which is a big setting or location in the Batman world. That one would have. I understand why they removed that one. That one is just too big when you're dealing with Justice League and Arkham. I mean, come on.
Yes.
How many people are going to be sitting there waiting for Batman at that point? People who aren't familiar with Sandman.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
The next one is the Scarecrow.
Yeah, with Jonathan Crane.
Yes, after being defeated by the Justice League, John Dee was sent to Arkham Asylum in the comic books, where Batman's villains go after being defeated. Oh my God, what a terrible... Why do people need to learn to write before they try to write anything else, specifically blogs in this case?
It's the era of blogging.
Yeah, one of those villains appeared in Sandman comics, Jonathan Crane, the fear-obsessed villain known as the Scarecrow. And he was actually depicted having a conversation with John Dee while they were both stuck in Arkham. And Scarecrow even mentions the Joker.
Yeah.
Though, of course, he doesn't appear in the comic book. The next one's Mr. Miracle. Mr. Miracle, a.k.a. Scott Free, was recently the protagonist of his own critically acclaimed miniseries. In 1989, he was a member of the Justice League.
Mm-hmm.
The Sandman #5, titled Passengers, Scott Free is having a nightmare about his childhood growing up in the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Darkseid's world under Granny Goodness.
And if you think about it, that one I understand why they cut that out.
That's just too fucking big.
It's way too big.
That
then you
is-
have to show Darkseid.
Yeah.
Because they showed Darkseid in the comic. And I understand in the comic it made sense because you're seeing
the
Scott
nature-
Fried's nightmare.
And the nature of comic books and just how it works and how audiences, or I should say the readers of comic books have come to expect that there's always going to be little things that are not necessarily important, but they're window dressing for your comic books.
Yes.
You know, it also paves the way for potential crossovers, you know, branding of other IPs.
And in the comic
And TV shows, you just can't do that. Can you imagine if we saw Apocalypse and Darkseid?
Exactly.
The focus would be on that
Yes.
rather than what we're supposed to be focusing on, which is the story of Sandman.
which is the weirdest element I always feel when it comes to comic books and then live adaptations of comic books is those moments, like the Darkseid moment, makes sense in comics because it makes your comic feel grandiose and epic.
Yep.
But if you do it in a live action, it takes away because you're putting this grandiose epic moment and making the audience forget about your story.
Yeah, a new show's got to stand on its own feet.
Exactly.
And it's got to have a chance to build out its own cosmology. The worst thing you can do with a show like this is introduce it with all of the baggage of the DC world where it never really has an opportunity to grow on its own because it already has those expectations attached from the get-go.
Like just what you were just alluding to just a second ago. Can you imagine if they did a scene with Scott Fried and you show his nightmare, which is him growing up in Apocalypse, and you see Darkseid? You mean to tell me that the audience is going to actually pay attention to the story at that point? I think
It would be hard
It'd
to
be
not
really
want to
difficult.
see that. Like, I want to
Exactly.
see that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it makes sense. The other one we already talked about, it is Sandman. He was removed. Also, one last one, Martian Manhunter. Mr. Miracle
Yes.
wakes up Justice League member Martian Manhunter to help Morpheus on his quest.
Yes.
How come I don't remember this?
Because so many things in the Sandman. You can go back in the Sandman, the first 12 issues, and there's so many little details that Gaiman threw in there. That's why the comic book feels so rich and so full of information and content.
Yeah.
Because, like, you have, like, moments like the Superman moment that a lot of people don't forget about. That basically there was actually the dream sequence of, like, people dreaming, I want to be Superman. And, you know, that's what why dreams were important. And then you get to Scott Fried, and it was to show that even heroes have nightmares. But those nightmares are what makes them stronger.
Yeah.
And again, shows the importance of dreaming because it
so
pushes a character.
Do you see how you described that? That was described perfectly well. But that also describes the concept for its own episode.
Exactly.
And you just don't have that
just
type
don't
of
have that
time with a
time.
show like this on Netflix. If this was in the 90s, where episode orders were 24, 25, 26, and there wasn't as much attention on the serialized format for television, then maybe you could do something like that.
That's
But
why I think looking back at the 5 episodes, there was stuff that was cut out that dealt with the mass DC landscape. And I think that he chose the right stories to focus on to kind of show the importance of dreams. And that's why we still get the Constantine storyline, which I think is one of the most powerful ones, because it deals with not just dreams, but basically the fact that the loss of hope, which ties to the end of the 5th episode. Because, like, you have that story of Constantine where all Constantine at the very end wanted his friend to have a peaceful death. He wanted her to be at peace. His only hope in the world was actually to make her happy one last time. Morpheus gives him that. He doesn't understand. Especially in the comic book, he thinks it's trivial, but he still does it to Constantine. And then, like, later on, he pieces it all together. Oh, this is what humans find important.
Right. So I wouldn't be surprised if Neil Gaiman did this a lot like how we do things when we review scripts, first drafts. And what do I always say? You go through your script after it's written, and you highlight everything that's just not needed.
Not needed.
And if it's not needed, if it's really not needed, a character, a location, an entire scene, if it really doesn't, if you take it out and nothing changes, it doesn't change your story, then remove it. And I have a feeling that's exactly what Neil Gaiman did here with Sandman. He looked at his entire storyline that he had written, and he's all, okay, well, what's the story?
What am I trying to say?
What am I trying to do here? And then he only kept the things in that mattered to that singular story.
Exactly.
And that's the way you got to do it. All right, so moving on, I want us to share and briefly talk about our favorite episode of the first 5 episodes.
Okay.
David, do you want to start us off?
Sure.
Okay.
Because it's a toss-up between these two.
Okay.
I'm going to choose the latter because I am going to hedge my bets and say the other episode I'm thinking is my favorite is probably yours. But my favorite episode has to be the one where he goes to hell, where he faces Lucifer. That whole episode, when it crescendos with the fight, made me smile and made me giddy because that showed just how powerful Morpheus is. And like, I like the concept of that fight where basically, as I told you earlier when we were covering the series, I'm like, how are you going to pull off a metaphysical fight, essentially, where Lucifer says, I am the form of a wolf.
Metaphorical.
Yeah. And like Dream says, well, I forgot what he says to defeat the wolf.
Yeah.
But they go through steps of like creatures. And then in the end, he basically becomes hope. Yeah. That is the one thing that will conquer anything, including in hell.
Yeah. It's such a good episode and a great scene. Great scene.
It's a great ending because it's kind of like that type of moment to me is like reminiscent of what I wrote here is like when Superman flies into space and just is flying and you hear the John Williams scene.
And he waves at the camera.
Right? Because it makes you feel good. It's that moment that basically that represents hope.
Yeah.
And you get to that very end of this episode, I'm like going, oh my God, they just turned Morpheus into freaking Superman because that's how powerful he is. He could take the embodiment of hope and no matter what.
And use it to defeat Lucifer.
Use it to defeat not just Lucifer, defeat the most powerful evil entity in the DC.
Is Lucifer evil though?
Well, considering like
I'm just being difficult.
The fact that he's the king of hell.
I'm just being difficult. I understand your point.
When he's the king of hell, I say that he's the most powerful.
Yeah.
But like that's the amazing thing about why I told one of my friends, when you watch this, this is why when everyone criticizes Morpheus in Sandman says he doesn't really do anything, he just talks. I'm like going, you guys don't get it. Morpheus is super powerful, like to the point where he can say something and he makes it happen.
I love how they took everything that. I mean, this is exactly how it felt in the comic books. It's just benevolent being that just walks through humanity, almost indifferent to the things around him. And that's the beautiful thing about the entire series as a whole, that slowly changes. He loses his indifference as the season progresses.
Because he begins to question the purpose of humanity, and in doing so, questions his own purpose.
And his own existence.
And his own existence.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree with you for that episode, Dave. That's a strong episode. So my episode. Now, this is a tough one for me.
Is this the one that I'm going to say?
I mean, the Constantine fan of me wants to pick episode 3. But
it was good.
Dude, it was a good episode. But the film nerd in me will have to take authority here and say that episode 5, titled 24/7.
24/7? Oh, okay. Well, 24/7's good.
It's a really good episode, directed by Jamie Childs and written by Amenzi Rosa. I was blown away by just how well done this episode was. I love single set pieces. This is something, if people follow our other podcasts that we do, our movie podcast, people are probably familiar or have heard me say that I love single location films, or at least minimal location films, like The Hateful Eight, and including the first Saw, where you can create an entire movie in essentially one place. I love what they did with 24/7, how they actually utilize that concept, because it becomes a test of talent when you confine your story essentially to a single location and manage to maintain the audience's attention. This episode is not only a masterclass in directing, but also writing. And I'd probably give this episode, if we were to give our episodes here an RMD score, I would give it a 100%. Because it is well directed, well written, well acted. The name of the actor who plays John D eludes me currently. He is perfect. That guy, I have followed that guy's career for a very long time. He pretty much does great with everything he does. This, to me, he was the perfect casting for John D.
Easily, yes. Because, See, now you have me thinking about it now, is especially how episode 5 culminates literally the whole journey of Morpheus up to that point, which is to get his 3 trinkets.
I would say it's the end of the first chapter.
Yeah.
Right.
And absolutely. Because he ends up, the way he ends up dealing with John is like the most epic thing ever, because you think that John actually has won. But in actuality, no, he did exactly what Dream wanted him to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you bring up a really good point, which is that all takes place in one location, the diner. There's so many things that happen in that diner, but the fact that they were able to encapsulate the whole story in that one area is really impressive. And it also has the culmination of what we just alluded to, the story of Morpheus, when he basically shows the importance of dreams to John.
Yeah.
And basically says, this is the power that I have. And it's
this episode is a major stepping stone.
It's a major stepping stone
to Morpheus's acknowledgement of humanity.
Yes.
Going from the moment of indifference to possibly viewing humanity as something entirely different in a way that he possibly has never viewed it before. And that's why episode 6 works so perfectly in position, and then episode 7, because all of it's about for the most part, humanity.
Well, because
And-
remember at the end of that, Morpheus at the end of episode 5 could have killed John.
yeah.
He chose not to, because while he was in rage mode at that point, he decided not to and just basically put John back to sleep, which you can make the comment that basically maybe that's a fate worse than death, but he didn't go outwardly and just kill a human being.
I mean, he didn't give him nightmares, right? He just put him to sleep.
Yeah, he just put him to sleep.
So in a lot of ways, it was an act of mercy because John Dee was a man that was tortured.
Mm-hmm.
He was crazy.
He was crazy. And like, instead of actually taking basically a godful wrath on him,
Mm-hmm.
Morpheus, for the first time and the first time up to that series, shows mercy on his own volition too. If you think about it, yes, he showed mercy in Dream a Little Dream of Me with Constantine, but that was because Constantine demanded he show mercy.
Yeah.
Every single time that basically he does something nice, it's because someone tells him to.
Yeah.
And then when you get to this point, he makes the actual choice to not take out vengeful wrath on John. Instead, he just basically just puts him to sleep, and in a weird sort of way, gives his own mercy.
Yeah, it's an act of mercy. And I think that says a lot. That's why it's such a good episode as well, because it does a lot for that character, Morpheus, because I would say for the first quarter, maybe even the first half of the first 5 episodes, he is intent on vengeance.
Yeah.
Look what he did to the gentleman that actually imprisoned him.
Yes.
I mean, now that's an awful
That's
fate.
an awful thing. And if you think about it, now take that in parallel what he does here. Suddenly you see that character growth.
Well, because he's starting to already change who he is, and he's also, his anger is subsiding, and just what he witnessed in the diner, that I could spend an hour just on this episode alone. I mean, the things that it says pertaining to our own culture, honesty, dishonesty, the reasons why we lie. Sometimes we need to lie. There's a bit of a utilitarian perspective going on as well.
That is the amazing thing of this series, is like, just simply talking about it with you and everything else really does make me think about like this episode even deeper. And dude, that just shows the greatness of how good this series truly is, and why people are saying it's really good is because now, to me, you can't make a decision what is your favorite episode. All the episodes were really freaking good.
Well, that's why it felt silly even putting that in the show notes, because I'm like, well, what's our favorite episode? Every episode is just okay. So the
phenomenal.
only episode that I did love it, but I'd say is the weaker of the 5 is the first one, and that's just because the story is just getting started.
Yeah, because it's built around mystery.
Yes, you have to rely on the reason why the second, the third, the fourth, the 5th episode works so well is because it's building on the momentum that was started in the first one.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, yeah, you're right. All of them are in the 90s easily.
Easily.
This episode is a little more difficult for me to dissect if I were like quickly, because not only is it saying something socially in general, but then also when you start dissecting the individual characters themselves,
Yeah,
they
you're
all
right.
represent something different in society. That's why it's such a good episode.
It is.
And if we had the time, David, I would have done a full discussion across the board with every single episode. It's just,
And the scary part is, this is not bloviating our skills when it comes to talking about these shows, but easily I think each episode you could spend at least 2 hours
yeah.
talking about the shot selection, talking about the imagery and everyone, the portrayals of each cast member, what they do in this series.
And that's another thing you mentioned really fast before you move on past it. The shot selection, the cinematography, and the way things were framed and blocked. All of it is very strategic. And it's a lot like a film, when I say it's a lot like a film, because film directors tend to really put their auteur hat on when they're making these types of films, and they want to say something. And this had that. This series had that. There was motivation. It wasn't just cool shots for cool shots' sake. There was motivation. There was a reason why they framed things a certain way. Okay, so before we close out our initial discussion, let's call it not our initial discussion, our second episode discussion on episodes 1 through 5. Let's talk a little bit about some development information, some background information. So the efforts to adapt the Sandman to film began in 1991, so almost immediately.
Pretty much.
And floundered in developmental hell for many years. In 2013, Goyer pitched a film adaptation of the series to Warner Brothers. Goyer and Gaiman were set to produce alongside Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who was planned to star and possibly direct.
Yep.
That's interesting.
I remember that, and I was like super excited to see that because
Well, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's great.
it's fantastic, and he was planning to be Morpheus.
Yeah, I could actually see that. I could see that working. However, Gordon-Levitt exited over creative differences in 2016. Due to the prolonged development of the film, Warner Brothers shifted its focus to television. Netflix signed a deal to produce the series in June 2019, and filming lasted from October 2020 to August 2021. Can you imagine being Gaiman, spending the better part of 30 years trying to get this thing adapted?
Well, this is his masterpiece. This is arguably, I've always told people, when it comes to Gaiman, yes, he has some amazing literary stories out there, but Sandman is his masterpiece. It is arguably his masterpiece.
I'm not going to disagree, although Books of Magic,
Books of Magic is good.
it's also relatively short.
It's short.
Hard to compare it to Sandman because
And
of
if
the difference in length.
And if you think about it, in Books of Magic, he really focuses heavily on trying to tie the DC universe into Sandman. But here, Sandman, the story in itself is like one of the most literally beautiful books
Yeah.
ever given to get put on page.
In another 100 years, it'll be on the shelves of literature.
Honestly, yeah. I
Yeah.
always feel that this is one of those not graphic novel, quote unquote graphic novels that deserves to actually be and studied in colleges.
Yeah.
You know, everyone says, "Oh, Watchmen, Alan Moore's Watchmen," and yes, I agree. Alan Moore's Watchmen is one of the seminal graphic novels of all time. Dark Knight, same thing. But Sandman is, in my opinion, better than Watchmen and The Dark Knight. And I've always said that because, like, there's so much that Gaiman poured into this story that people kind of gloss over because it's a little hard to, everyone constantly says, it's kind of hard to imagine what Gaiman is saying. And I'm going, exactly. But Gaiman, when he writes a story, his type of writing just takes you along and makes you imagine it, gives it some life in your brain.
Yeah. So get this, David. So during one of these developmental hell moments, at one point, Michael Jackson
Yes.
pitched himself to
I
star
remember that.
as Morpheus,
As Morpheus.
in a Sandman adaptation. And I will say now that would have killed the IP.
I think that would have been like a terrible thing.
Yeah. According to Sandman author Neil Gaiman, there was a time that Michael Jackson wished to play the lead character, Dream, in an adaptation of the comic. MTV's Josh Horowitz tweeted a video excerpt of an interview with Gaiman in which he related the story of the president of Warner Brothers informing him in 1996 that the self-proclaimed king of pop had pitched himself as Dream.
Yes.
Although the Sandman has now been successfully transformed to a hit Netflix series, many of the previous attempts to adapt the story to screen have been off the mark.
Yes.
I can't disagree. That's bad.
That would be bad. That honestly would be. I still say, though, the Joseph Gordon-Levitt one, I thought had some legs on it, especially since David Goyer was behind it.
I think that would have worked.
I think it would have worked.
I don't think it would have been awful. I mean, at least I don't know what Gordon Levitt had in mind when it came to from the directing side. I didn't even realize he was a director. So
Yeah.
this must have been some type of vanity project that he wanted to direct. That I don't know if I'd want a first-time director directing Sandman. But as Dream, I mean, Joseph Gordon-Levitt is a really good actor.
He's a very good actor.
So it would have been interesting to see what he would have done with the role. But in retrospect, we got a great series, so maybe all these failures amounted for a reason, you know? Amounted to a reason, I should say.
Yeah, he just, as the saying goes, Gaiman is a very patient man. So if he had to wait 30 years to get Sandman from page to screen, I'm happy to at least say we got to see it on screen.
Yeah, without a doubt. Now, David, I don't know if you were aware of this. You and I, we talked about it off air. We were both kind of dumbfounded, stupefied that apparently Sandman was not going to get picked up for a second season, that there was actually rumors that it was going to be canceled.
It was going to be canceled.
And Neil Gaiman was actually on Twitter talking about ways to boost the chance of it having a second season, telling people how to watch, when to watch, share it, good old-fashioned word of mouth. And there was an actual fear that there wasn't going to be a second season, which would be a travesty. As far as it goes, television and adaptations and things that should be on the air, it would have been a travesty.
Oh, absolutely. Because the fact that I understand how Netflix views their products. I mean,
Especially
productions.
Especially currently, they are in the midst of a cancel campaign.
A cancel campaign because all the production companies are doing that, and they're solely using the premise of viewer numbers to cancel series, and it amazes me that if you ask comic book fans, all comic book fans have seen Sandman,
even non-comic book fans.
but that's the thing. It's only now non-comic book fans are trickling in because they're hearing the good vibes from comic book people saying, "Hey, this might be actually the best
word of
comic
mouth."
book."
Yeah,
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth. There's been a lot of positive word of mouth, and that's what Neil Gaiman pretty much alluded to in a recent tweet, where Neil Gaiman indicated that the chances of season 2 happening are improving, and according to a recent tweet, they're getting better every day. The chances of a new season, and it has a lot to do with the fact that there is a lot of positive word of mouth.
Yes.
Typically, TV shows, as well as box office when it comes to movies, they want that instant gratification. They want that first weekend numbers. That's what sets the tone for a lot of films, and understandably that is. Usually if something blows the box office wide open at 100 million on its first weekend, chances are more people are going to check it out. Oh, wow, everyone likes this movie. But then every once in a while you have those movies that have a very soft premiere. But then you have positive word of mouth, and it takes off and increases week after week after week at the box office. In fact, Top Gun Maverick is a recent film that has benefited from that. It did pretty well in its first weekend, but it's a fucking unstoppable, immovable train now because of positive word of mouth. And it seems like the same thing is happening with Sandman, which is good, because if this was last week and we were talking, I would be crying. I would be upset. But fortunately, recent news would suggest that the fears of cancellation are subsiding, and they are favoring now the possibility of a season 2. I would be really disappointed, Dave, if we didn't get a season 2. We're currently in let's just call it, we live as DC fans, we live in the sewer. Okay? Warner Brothers doesn't know how to run their ship, and they throw all their audiences in a sewer and expect us to wait for them to just drop shit on us. And unfortunately, most of us do sit down there in that sewer with our mouths open waiting to get shit and pissed on, because that's what we've been accustomed to for the better part of 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that for this. We're finally given something that is good, a good adaptation, not split. You know, when you look at some of the top tier DC films that have resonated in the box office, it's still steeped in controversy. Some fans hate it. Look at the Snyderverse.
Yes.
Some fans love it, some fans hate it, and it's split. Sandman, for the most part, is being unanimously loved.
Loved.
Why would you not continue a franchise or an IP that, for the most part, has not just critical claim, but you also have fan critical praise as
Yeah.
well, which is important. So you have the best of both worlds. That's what a lot of properties don't get. Many times you'll get a movie that's based in the geek culture, let's say, that is being praised by the fans, but the critics hate it. The critics love this, and for the most part, the fans do as well.
Yeah.
Let's get a season 2.
I have to agree. I mean, like, I know in the last episode me and you were talking about, I made the comment, I believe, where I said, if we didn't get a season 2, I'm okay because the story, the way it ends feels complete to me. Like, you have the beginning of Sandman in episode 1 and it ends in episode 11. And the way it ends in episode 11 was actually
No spoilers.
no
though.
spoilers, but I think that if I were to say that's the end of the Sandman series,
Mhm.
I can live with it. But just ever since then, going back and really studying these episodes, it makes me really want to see what Gaiman can do more.
We've only scraped the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, exactly. You've only scraped the tip. They've only licked Gaiman's tip.
Oh wow! Sometimes we like just the tip, but in this situation, we want all in.
We want the whole shaft.
Yeah, give it to us. I'm not giving anything. You give it to me.
Because like I actually read a rumor about like what season 2 could encapsulates, and I was like there was one that I was like, my God, if he was able to pull it off, that'd be amazing. Is like season 2 encapsulates Books of Magic. If Gaiman were to actually pull that off,
Wouldn't that just be a separate series then? Just do
That's
a
the
separate
thing.
series. Just
that's the thing. It's like,
Yeah,
where do you
there's-
go with Sandman here? Where do you go with Morpheus? I mean, you could make the transition if he's really wanting to take all of his properties and kind of make all of his universe, the Sandman universe, just like what he tried to do with the comics and tie everything together. It'd be amazing if he were to take the Books of Magic story and then tie it into the Sandman.
So you're advocating for the Gaiman universe.
The Gaiman universe.
That's a universe I'd like to live in. I'm not gonna lie. Okay,
It'd be
David.
cool.
We do need to close out today's show. Why don't you really quick give me an overall score of episodes 1 through 5?
Is there? Do you really have to ask me this?
What is it, Dave?
It's 100.
Oh,
It's
you-
100, Mike. It's up to this
so
point.
predictable.
Yeah, exactly. It's 100 to this point. And that's absolutely, I will die on that hill.
Okay.
Sandman is, I've kind of alluded to it.
No objectivity at all.
No objectivity
from David.
at all. Sandman is the best comic book adaptation ever. Ever.
I don't disagree. I'd have to go back and watch a few other things to confirm whether or not that is fact, but I'm inclined to agree. It's pretty damn good. I'm going to give this a 98% on the RMD score. Okay, so we will be doing a third part. We may take a brief break and touch on another topic and then come back to this, and then we're going to cover episodes 6 through 11. I want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure to go to our Patreon page. I can't talk tonight, David. I'm having a lot of difficulties. Patreon.com/Rayman Digital. Pledge at least $1 and you'll gain access to our Oblivion Bar discussion, which is essentially this show. It's a mini version of this show where we get into specific topics that we may not have time to get into on the regular show. Patreon.com/Rayman Digital. Thank you, David.
Thank you.